Brothers and sisters in Christ, today I invite you to step into one of the most powerful and mysterious visions ever received by a saint. This is not a legend or a vague mystical impression. It is a prophetic dream entrusted to Saint Don Bosco, spiritual father to countless young souls and tireless guardian of the Church. In this profound vision, Don Bosco saw the Church herself, the Pope, the Virgin Mary, and the Holy Eucharist. And what he saw did not simply concern his own time. It speaks loudly and urgently to our own. This is why we must listen carefully. Don Bosco did not share this dream out of mere curiosity or for entertainment. He revealed it to awaken souls, to prepare hearts, and to guide us through the great storms that were to come. Storms we may be sailing through even now, as the year 2025 unfolds before us. So listen with the ears of faith, watch with the eyes of the Spirit, because at the end of this vision, I will share a powerful message, one that could fundamentally change how you see everything that's happening in the Church today. Now let us begin, just as Don Bosco did when he first shared his vision with the boys in his care. He spoke plainly, simply, but his words carried the undeniable weight of eternity. "I want to tell you a dream," Don Bosco began, his voice resonating with an inner conviction. "It is true that those who dream do not always reason, but I, who would even confess my own sins to you if I weren't afraid of scaring you or bringing down the house, I will tell you about this dream for your spiritual good, for your guidance in the days ahead. I had this dream just a few days ago," Don Bosco continued, "and I invite you now to imagine yourselves there with me, to step into this vivid reality. Picture the scene, a vast and endless sea, no land in sight, only the place where you stand, an isolated rock rising precariously from the churning waves. All around, the water stretches to the horizon like a battlefield waiting for war, dark and restless. And in the distance, something stirs. Countless ships begin to emerge from the mist, their silhouettes growing larger, more menacing with every passing moment. They are not peaceful vessels carrying cargo or explorers. They are instruments of war, formidable and terrifying. These ships are armed to the teeth, their iron beaks shaped like deadly spears, forged to pierce and destroy. Their decks are loaded with cannons, rifles, explosives, even what Don Bosco described as incendiary books, each one a weapon of confusion, spiritual decay, and moral corruption. And they are not drifting aimlessly. They are advancing swiftly, deliberately, with a singular, malevolent purpose against one solitary ship that towers above them all. This central vessel is a majestic flagship, vast and noble in appearance, standing tall against the encroaching tide. It is the Church, and it is under siege. From every side, enemy fleets press in. They ram, they fire, they curse, their crews screaming blasphemies into the wind. Their aim is chillingly clear: to sink the Church, to set it ablaze, to silence its eternal witness forever. It is the image of a Church surrounded, outnumbered, battered by ideologies, disinformation, moral confusion, and even internal betrayal. A Church facing an existential threat. And for many watching, both within the vision and in our own reality, the future looks grim, almost hopeless. But Don Bosco's vision does not end in despair. Surrounding the great flagship are many smaller boats, faithful communities, brave religious orders, dedicated lay movements, each maneuvering valiantly to protect the flagship, receiving their orders directly from her, and doing their part to hold the line against the onslaught. Yet the sea is against them. The winds are harsh, whipping up monstrous waves. The storm favors the enemy, relentless and unforgiving. It is a vision that feels unsettlingly, eerily close to our own time, especially as we enter the Jubilee Year 2025. Already, we see a church rocked by division, by global conflicts that sow chaos, by a faith that is attacked not only by overt violence, but by insidious indifference, by a rising tide of secularism. The world grows louder, more frantic, more distracting, while silence and contemplation deepen inside many sanctuaries, becoming harder to find. And as the enemies of truth grow bold, attacking the very foundations of Christian morality, the faithful are left wondering, where is this all heading? Is the church doomed? And yet, in the very center of this storm, amidst the chaos and the fury, something sacred and immutable stands. There, rising miraculously out of the raging sea, are two immense columns, not distant from one another, but close enough that the flagship might pass between them, finding safe passage. They are tall, unshakable, seeming to be crowned with divine power, radiating strength. On the first column stands the majestic image of the Immaculate Virgin Mary, serene and powerful, her gaze fixed on the battle, not as a bystander, but as a queen overseeing her domain, ready to intercede. At her feet is written, in clear, bold letters, the Latin title, Auxilium Christianorum, Help of Christians. It is more than a title. It is a promise, a beacon of hope. On the second column, taller still and gleaming with heavenly light, is a large, radiant Eucharistic host, shining with an otherworldly luminescence. Beneath it are inscribed the profound words, Salus Credentium, salvation of the faithful. It is Jesus, truly present and alive in the Blessed Sacrament, the bread of life, the very anchor of the Church in the middle of a storm that no human force can tame. These are not mere symbols. They are the anchors of survival, the very pillars of salvation. And Don Bosco makes it clear, the only way for the Church, represented by the magnificent flagship, to endure the storm and reach safety is to secure itself to these two pillars, Mary and the Eucharist. In this moment of profound danger, the Pope, the visible head of the Church, gathers the pilots of the smaller ships around him. He holds counsel, he leads, offering guidance and encouragement. But the storm continues to grow in ferocity. Twice he calls them together. Twice the skies darken, the waves swell higher, the enemy presses harder. The flagship sails forward, resolute, even as the enemies strike with more fury, more cunning. Books filled with twisted doctrines are hurled like grenades. Ideologies that spread confusion are unleashed. Media that mock holiness and distort the gospel bombard the ship. The cannons roar, divisions multiply, scandals erupt. Betrayals even from within the Church wound her deeply. Voices rise that contradict her fundamental teachings, creating chaos. The iron beaks of the enemy ships strike again and again, tearing at her hull. Still, the Church moves forward, propelled by an unseen force. Sometimes she is hit. She suffers deep wounds, gashes in her side, and for a moment, it seems she might sink. But then, something miraculous happens, something truly divine. A breath, a mysterious celestial wind, flows from the two towering columns, touching the ship, and the breaches in her side are healed. The wounds close, the flagship endures, seemingly impervious to total destruction. This breath, Don Bosco implies, is grace, divine intervention. How could this not remind us of today as we approach the Jubilee Year of 2025, a year the Vatican has named Pilgrims of Hope? We are not entering a season of comfort, but one of crucial decision, a time of spiritual warfare. Don Bosco's vision is more than a dream. It's a living prophecy. The Church is navigating between collapse and victory, confusion and clarity. And the only path to peace, the only true safety, lies in anchoring ourselves, individually and collectively, to the two eternal columns, the Holy Eucharist and the Blessed Virgin Mary. For many, 2025 will be a year of great hope, of spiritual renewal. But for others, it may be a year of reckoning, a moment of profound choice. Don Bosco warned that what the church had suffered up until his time, the persecutions, the trials, was almost nothing compared to what was coming. He foresaw unprecedented persecutions and great trials. The vision does not pretend the storm will pass quickly. In fact, it shows that things may grow worse, far worse, before they grow better. But here is the grace, the profound hope. God has already given us everything we need. We have Mary. We have the Eucharist. And if we cling to them, if we throw our spiritual chains upon those columns like the flagship did in Don Bosco's dream, we will not be lost. The question is not whether the storm is coming. It's already here, swirling around us. The question is, where are you anchored? This is the time to renew your devotion to Our Lady, to pray the Rosary daily, to consecrate your life to her maternal care, to trust her as the early church did, as the saints did, as Don Bosco himself did. This is the time to return to the Eucharist with profound reverence and awe, to attend Mass more often, to receive Holy Communion with a pure heart, and to spend time in adoration before the Blessed Sacrament. Let the real presence of Jesus be your compass when everything around you is shifting, when the world's certainties crumble. Because a time may come, perhaps even in 2025, when the winds grow stronger and the sea rises higher, and only those tethered, truly tethered, to the pillars will remain standing. And so, we are left with a choice. The flagship has not sunk. It is wounded, yes, but healing. The Pope still stands at the helm, unwavering, and the two columns are still within reach, gleaming with divine light. Don Bosco's dream was not just for his boys. It was for us, for this generation, and perhaps it was for this very year, 2025. Are you ready? As Don Bosco continued his astonishing account, he described those two towering columns rising from the sea, pillars not of mere stone, but of divine strength, rooted in eternity. On the first, grander column stood a magnificent statue of the Immaculate Virgin Mary, shining with maternal peace and celestial majesty, her gaze loving and protective. At her feet hung a banner, clearly inscribed with the Latin words, Auxilium Christianorum, help of Christians. It was more than a title. It was a living promise, a declaration that in every generation, no matter how fierce the storm, Our Lady stands ready to defend, guide, and protect the faithful, leading them to her Son. On the second column, taller still and glowing with an even more intense holy light, was the most blessed sacrament, the Eucharistic host itself. This sacred image, proportionate in size to the great pillar beneath it, bore the inscription, Salus Credentium, salvation of the faithful. It was a radiant, undeniable symbol of Jesus truly present in the Eucharist, body, blood, soul, and divinity, the very beating heart of the Church and the hope of the world, the source of all grace and strength. These two columns, Mary and the Eucharist, stood unshaken, unmoving, even as the sea raged around them, even as the enemy fleets unleashed their fury. They were the answer. They were the singular path to survival. Realizing the extreme existential danger surrounding the Church, the supreme commander of the great ship, the Roman pontiff, the Pope, called for an immediate meeting. The faithful were in peril. The enemy ships had grown in number and boldness, and their attacks became more vicious by the hour, designed to utterly demoralize and destroy. The Pope swiftly summoned the pilots of the smaller ships, bishops, leaders of religious orders, those entrusted with guiding communities across the turbulent sea of this world. One by one, they boarded the flagship, their faces etched with concern, and gathered around him in urgent counsel. Together, they met in unity, seeking divine wisdom to discern how to navigate forward, how to steer the Church through the unprecedented storm. Yet the calm was tragically brief. The waves swelled once more, the winds howled with renewed ferocity, and the storm intensified, growing more violent than before. Time was short. a precious commodity, and each leader was sent back to govern his own ship, holding fast to the guidance received from the Holy Father. But the enemy was not finished. Their malice knew no bounds. The storm roared back with renewed, terrifying violence. Darkness spread across the sea like a thick, impenetrable fog, obscuring all light and hope. And the Church, the mighty flagship, once again stood in the very center of it all. Targeted, opposed, assailed, but never abandoned by God. And in that overwhelming darkness, the Pope, with an unshakable resolve, returned to the helm. With both hands, he firmly took command of the great ship, his gaze fixed on the distance. His goal was clear, singular: to guide the Church directly between the two heavenly columns. It was the only place of safety, the only refuge left in a sea that had lost all reason, all clarity, all hope. Above him, from the towering peaks of the columns, anchors and large hooks hung down, gleaming faintly through the gloom. They were fastened to long, unbreakable chains, waiting to be secured, ready to offer salvation. They symbolized the boundless grace and divine strength available to those who would attach themselves truly and completely to the pillars of truth and faith. But securing the ship would not be easy. The battle was far from over. The enemy ships now surged forward in full, desperate force. They unleashed their most dangerous attacks, not only with physical weapons, but with insidious ideas, deceptive writings, and corrosive false teachings. They hurled books and incendiary materials toward the deck, trying to flood the ship with confusion, internal division, and distracting noise. Others assaulted the ship directly with roaring cannons and sharp iron beaks, hoping to tear it apart from the outside, to utterly dismantle its structure. But what they did not understand, what their worldly power could not comprehend, was this: the strength of the Church does not come from the weapons of this world. It comes from the sacred Eucharist, the very body and blood of Christ, and from the powerful maternal intercession of the Mother of God. The Church's true defense is not made of steel, but of sanctity. It is not built on numbers or political power, but on the sacraments. It is not maintained by human politics or clever strategies, but by divine grace. And so, the Pope pressed on, unwavering, even as the tide of hell rose against him. As Don Bosco's vision continued, the battle intensified to a fever pitch. The sea raged louder than ever, a churning vortex of chaos and destruction. The enemy ships, countless and terrifyingly coordinated, rammed the great vessel of the Church with renewed, demonic fury. Like wolves closing in on wounded prey, they threw every weapon they had, striking it with their sharp iron beaks, tearing at its hull, lobbing books filled with confusion, despair, and insidious lies, and unleashing torrents of verbal assaults, curses, and blasphemies meant to shake the very soul of Christendom. And yet, through it all, the flagship held its course. Despite the relentless onslaught, the ship did not falter. It surged forward, battered but unbroken. The enemies grew more desperate, more enraged, their frustration mounting. They circled the Pope's ship with a palpable hatred and contempt, their every effort focused on its destruction. But for all their strength, their cunning, their overwhelming numbers, their efforts were in vain. Time and again, they launched fresh assaults, exhausting their ammunition, their crews growing weary. But the Church, though struck with powerful blows, though suffering deep wounds, did not fall. Yes, the ship suffered wounds. Its sides were breached, its body was scarred, sometimes appearing to be on the verge of sinking. But each time a wound was inflicted, something mysterious happened, something undeniably divine. A breath, a life-giving, healing wind, flowing invisibly but powerfully from the two heavenly columns, Mary and the Eucharist, would touch the ship, sealing the breach, healing it as if it had never been there. And that breath was divine grace. the very power of God. The enemy, seeing their physical firepower fail, seeing their logical arguments crumble, resorted to raw, unbridled violence and spiritual malice. They abandoned their weapons and turned to fists, to fury, to curses and blasphemies, screaming their rage into the storm. They fought like those who had already lost hope, who knew their time was short, unleashing pure, impotent hatred. And then, in a moment of profound tragedy, the unthinkable happened. The Pope, the visible head of the Church, the courageous captain of the storm-tossed ship, was gravely wounded. Those near him rushed to his aid. They lifted him, tried to steady him, to staunch the flow of blood. But a second, fatal blow struck. He fell once more, this time never to rise again. From the enemy ships came a deafening shout of victory, a triumphant roar of celebration that echoed across the desolate sea. It was as if, for a fleeting moment, evil truly believed it had triumphed, that the Church had finally been vanquished. They rejoiced in what they thought was the final, decisive fall of the Church, of the papacy. But they were catastrophically wrong, for almost instantly, miraculously, another pope was elected. So quickly did the decision come, Don Bosco observed, that the news of the former pope's death and the glorious rise of his successor reached the ships almost simultaneously, a seamless, divine transition. And with this new shepherd at the helm, a new pope infused with divine grace, the ship did not falter. It did not drift aimlessly. It did not break apart in grief or confusion. Instead, it surged forward with greater clarity and conviction than before, propelled by a renewed spiritual energy. This new pope, resolute, wise, and clearly led by the Spirit, took immediate command. Without hesitation, he guided the mighty vessel directly between the two towering columns. And there, at last, the Church found refuge. From the front of the ship, a strong chain was secured to the column bearing the Holy Eucharist. From the back, another chain was fastened to the column of the Immaculate Virgin Mary. And when the ship was safely moored, securely tethered between them, a great, miraculous calm spread across the once raging sea. Suddenly, the chaos broke. The enemy ships, which had once been so confident, so menacing, fled in utter disarray. Some collided with each other in their panic, tearing themselves apart. Others simply sank into the depths, dragging nearby vessels down into the abyss with them, swallowed by the very waters they had sought to control. Those who had fought valiantly alongside the Church, the small boats, the faithful defenders, were the first to chain themselves securely to the columns, finding their own safety. Others who had kept their distance, watching cautiously out of fear or indecision, now tentatively rowed forward, seeing the enemy in full retreat. They drew near to the place of safety, securing themselves to the hooks and anchors that hung down from the divine pillars. And at last, profound peace returned to the sea, a peace born of divine order. At this point in the vision, Don Bosco turned to his spiritual son, Don Rua, who would later become his successor, and asked him, "What do you think of this vision, my son?" Don Rua responded with remarkable insight, having grasped the core meaning. "I think the Pope's ship represents the Church, of which he is the visible head. The other ships are the people, the faithful, the clergy, the religious. The sea is this world, constantly in turmoil. Those who defend the large ship are the faithful, devoted to the Holy See, to Christ, and to his Church. The others are its relentless enemies, who, with every kind of weapon, attempt to destroy it. And the two columns of salvation seem to be devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary and to the most holy sacrament of the Eucharist." Don Bosco agreed, confirming his spiritual son's interpretation, but then added one chilling correction, a warning that pierces deeply into our own time. "You are right, my son," he said. "But there is something else. The enemy ships represent persecutions and great trials, Persecutions and great trials are being prepared for the Church. What has happened so far is almost nothing compared to what must come. He foresaw an era of unprecedented challenge, a spiritual battle of epic proportions. The Church has officially declared the year 2025 as a Jubilee Year, a special time of grace, conversion, and pilgrimage. It will mark 25 years since the great Jubilee of the year 2000, a milestone of hope. But Don Bosco's dream reminds us that Jubilee is not only about celebration, it is also about spiritual warfare, about discerning the true path forward amidst deepening chaos. It is about returning to the pillars that preserve the faith during times of unprecedented attack. If we are truly living through the fulfillment of this prophecy, and many signs suggest we might be, then 2025 may be more than just another holy year. It may be the year when the Church must make a decisive choice. Will we anchor ourselves deeply and irrevocably to the Eucharist and to Our Lady, or will we drift further into the accelerating storm, becoming lost? We are already witnessing rampant divisions, profound scandals that shake the very foundations of trust, and widespread confusion spreading across doctrine and discipline. Many faithful feel spiritually homeless, unsure where the truth lies, unsure whom to trust. And yet, Don Bosco saw all of this. He saw the rift between faithfulness and rebellion, between absolute clarity and dangerous compromise. He foresaw the fall of a pope, a moment of profound desolation and apparent defeat, and the subsequent, swift rise of one who would courageously restore the Church to her proper, unshakable center between the Eucharist and the Virgin Mary. This is the pattern, this is the hope, and this is the urgent call to action. In times of profound uncertainty, we are not called to despair, to lament, or to simply watch idly. We are called to anchor, to act with profound faith and unwavering resolve. The message could not be clearer. The Holy Eucharist, the real presence of Christ in our midst, is our food, our light, our weapon, our very lifeblood. The Blessed Virgin Mary, our Mother and Queen, is our protector, our intercessor, and our unfailing guide. These two pillars are not optional devotions. They are essential for survival, the very means of salvation. Don Bosco's dream ends not with defeat, not with the Church sinking, but with profound peace and renewed clarity. But that peace comes only after the Church has been wounded, only after the Pope has tragically fallen, and only once the successor, chosen by God, leads the Church with courage and clarity back to her sacred, immutable foundations. Brothers and sisters, if the powerful winds of this dream are indeed reaching us in our time, if the signs align and 2025 becomes the turning point Don Bosco foresaw, then now is the moment to act with absolute conviction. Now is the time to secure our lives, our families, and our faith communities to the two eternal columns, Mary and the Eucharist. For in the turbulent sea of this world, there is no other safe harbor. And so, Don Bosco concluded his vision with one clear, resounding instruction, a call to every soul hearing his words. We must do our best to practice and promote devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Holy Eucharist everywhere, among everyone. Not just privately, not just inside the safe walls of churches or whispered in safe company. These two pillars must be raised publicly, lived boldly, and clung to with everything we have, with every fiber of our being. Why? Because this dream was not merely for his time. It speaks directly and urgently to ours, and perhaps more specifically, to the year ahead, 2025. We live in a church surrounded by storms. Profound scandals have wounded the faithful, leaving deep scars and a pervasive loss of trust. Divisions tear at the very body of Christ, often from within. Confusion about fundamental truths, about morality, and even about the sacraments has taken root in many places, like a spiritual blight. In some parts of the world, open, violent persecution of Christians is growing. In others, the persecution is quieter, more insidious, but no less deadly. It comes in the form of relentless ridicule, systematic marginalization, or a pervasive culture that has forgotten what holiness even looks like. A culture that actively mocks piety. And as these relentless storms swirl, many faithful are searching desperately for clarity, for true leadership, for refuge, for a safe harbor for their souls. Don Bosco's vision offers not only powerful symbols, but a precise spiritual strategy. It warns us unequivocally that no human solution will save the Church. No clever policy, no political maneuvering, no fleeting ideology, not even brilliant strategies or charismatic personalities will truly anchor the Church in the chaos of this world. Only two things will: Jesus in the Eucharist and Mary, help of Christians. And this is why 2025 may carry an unprecedented prophetic weight. The Church has officially declared it a Jubilee Year, a time of profound renewal, global pilgrimage, and reconciliation. Pilgrims from across the globe will journey to Rome, seeking grace and restoration, hoping for healing. But could there be more to this timing? Could this Jubilee be occurring precisely in the moment Don Bosco foresaw? A critical juncture when the spiritual battle reaches a decisive tipping point. It's worth remembering Don Bosco's chilling, yet prophetic, words. What has happened so far is almost nothing compared to what must come. That warning wasn't vague. He was telling us that the trials the Church had experienced up until that point, the rise of anti-clericalism, the loss of the Papal States, the early persecutions, were only preludes, mere shadows of a larger, far more intense confrontation on the horizon. Might 2025 be the threshold of that larger storm? Already, voices from within and outside the Church are speaking of dramatic, transformative changes. Some anticipate a moral reckoning, a necessary purification. Others speak of a powerful spiritual revival, a new Pentecost. Still others fear internal collapse, an unraveling from within. It's as though the world is collectively on the edge of something immense, something truly epoch-defining. But no one quite knows what. That pervasive uncertainty only makes Don Bosco's vision more urgent, more terrifyingly relevant. In his dream, devotion to the Eucharist was not a poetic image or an optional pious practice. It was absolute survival. In a time when many within the Church question the real presence of Christ in the Blessed Sacrament, when reverence for the Mass has tragically declined in many places, and when some openly call for theological reform rather than heartfelt repentance and renewed faith, Don Bosco's message echoes like a thunderclap. The Eucharist is the only anchor strong enough to hold the Church firm, the only true source of its strength and identity. And the same is true of Mary. She is not an optional devotion, a sentimental relic of the past. She is the God-ordained protector of the Church, our powerful intercessor. At Fatima, Lourdes, Akita, and La Salette, approved apparitions across centuries, she has consistently pointed us back to prayer, penance, and her divine Son. In Don Bosco's dream, it is her image towering over the raging sea that offers hope, healing, and ultimate victory when all else collapses. If the Jubilee of 2025 is to bear true fruit, to be a source of genuine renewal, it must be deeply rooted in these two pillars. Not in spectacle, not in diplomacy, not in vague optimism or human strategies, but in radical Eucharistic renewal and total Marian trust. And so, we must ask ourselves, individually and collectively, where do we stand? Are we anchored to these two indispensable columns? Are our souls truly formed in Eucharistic devotion, or are we drifting from it, drawn by other currents? Do we turn to Our Lady in profound confidence, or do we treat her like a symbolic footnote, a quaint tradition? Are our homes, our parishes, and our very hearts oriented around the tabernacle, the true presence of Christ, or something else? Something less eternal? 2025 may very well reveal the answers to these crucial questions. The world is watching. The church is in motion, reeling, struggling, praying. And while we cannot predict the exact events that will unfold, we can prepare for them, both spiritually and practically. And preparation begins with obedience to the prophecy. Secure the church between the columns. The Jubilee Year is not just a celebration. It could be the crossroads, the moment of decision, a time when the church either secures itself more firmly to what is eternal, to her divine foundations, or drifts further into danger, losing her way. A time when a new generation of Catholics rises in reverent devotion and courageous faith, or disappears into the fog of secularism and spiritual indifference. If Don Bosco's vision was a message for the church, then the church of 2025 is its loudest, most urgent echo. Because as we look around today, we don't see literal warships with cannons and iron beaks attacking the Vatican. But we do see powerful institutions attacking the church from every side. Laws are passed that fundamentally undermine Christian morality. Global systems redefine human nature itself, denying the dignity of life, distorting the sanctity of marriage, twisting the very meaning of the body. These foundational truths are no longer just questioned. They are aggressively opposed, ridiculed, and criminalized. Don Bosco's warships are not fantasy. They are here now, in spiritual form, and instead of gunpowder, they carry corrosive ideologies, highly organized, well-funded, and profoundly persuasive. Instead of physical flames, they spread confusion, spiritual complacency, and the insidious erosion of faith, burning away souls. The weapons are digital, psychological, cultural, and political. And what makes them even more dangerous is that many of them now come from within the harbor, from within the very ranks of the church. The Pope in Don Bosco's dream was not attacked by outsiders alone. The chaos was not only from foreign vessels. There were many ships in the sea that once claimed to be friends of the flagship. Smaller boats that in time drifted away, losing their way. Some retreated in fear, unwilling to face the storm. Others were pulled into the current of the enemy, subtly assimilated into their agenda. Still others stood back, watching from a distance, unwilling to get involved. Their indifference a form of betrayal. Does this not chillingly resemble our present condition? We see faithful Catholics confused by bishops who contradict one another, by priests who sow doubt. We see priests discouraged, religious communities shrinking, and lay people torn between loyalty to the magisterium and bitter disappointment. We see divisions not only in fundamental doctrine, but in basic language. Words like truth, justice, and mercy are now interpreted in radically different ways that deeply conflict with each other. The result is a church that speaks with many voices, yet often lacks a unified prophetic sound, struggling to be heard above the noise. And still, the Eucharist and Our Lady stand firm. They are unchanged, untouchable, unmovable, timeless. The columns remain, waiting for us to tether ourselves to them, offering unshakable refuge. But here is where Don Bosco's prophecy pierces most deeply, speaking directly to our fears and hopes. He tells us that the church will be gravely wounded, that her enemies will believe they've won, that even the Holy Father will fall twice. And in that moment of profound collapse, the enemies will celebrate, believing their triumph is complete. It's a chilling, almost unbearable image of desolation, but it is not the end, because just as quickly, miraculously, a new pope rises, one elected with speed and clarity, one who immediately, decisively secures the church between the two columns, who restores the course and ushers in a great calm, a return to divine order. Now think of the times we are living in. The papacy today sits in a moment of unique vulnerability, facing unprecedented global challenges. Pope Francis has led the Church through a decade of immense transformation, significant controversy, and tireless outreach. He has stirred admiration, concern, hope, and confusion, often all at once, in the same heart. And now, at the doorstep of the 2025 Jubilee, we face the possibility, indeed, the inevitability of transition. Whether this profound transition occurs in 2025 or after, we do not know. But we do know this. Don Bosco saw a wounded church. He saw the tragic death of a pope, and he saw the swift rise of another who would courageously anchor the church to her true, eternal foundations. Some believe this moment may soon arrive. Some wonder if 2025 will mark not only a year of pilgrimage but of judgment, a reckoning, a profound reshaping. Could the next Jubilee be more than ceremonial? Could it be apocalyptic? Not in the catastrophic sense of destruction, but in the literal one. A revelation does not always mean destruction. Sometimes it means profound clarity, a tearing away of veils. Perhaps the trials we face are not signs of defeat, but the painful, necessary beginnings of renewal, a purification. Perhaps the Pope's fall in Don Bosco's vision represents not only a physical death, but the symbolic collapse of false security, of human strategies, forcing the Church to choose what truly matters, what truly endures. And what truly matters is not prestige, popularity, or fleeting innovation. What matters is the Eucharist. What matters is Mary. This is what Don Bosco insisted on. Not reform for its own sake, not rebellion, not retreat into fear, but a bold, uncompromising return to the sacraments, return to the rosary, return to the mother and to the meal, return to the very heart of the gospel itself, to Christ. And this return will not happen by accident. It will require voices, prophetic voices, not voices that stir division or hatred, but voices that speak clearly, with profound charity, but without compromise, with boundless mercy, but never at the expense of unwavering truth. These voices must rise not only from the clergy and the hierarchy, but powerfully from the laity, from parents, teachers, workers, students, from the faithful remnant who know that the storm is here and who refuse to abandon the ship, who choose to anchor themselves. In many ways, 2025 could be a year of profound testing, not only for leaders, but for every single soul. Will we anchor our lives to Christ in the Eucharist? Will we entrust ourselves completely to the powerful intercession of Our Lady, our Mother? Or will we seek salvation in fleeting noise, in worldly activism, in convenience, in theological fads, in political solutions that ultimately fail? These questions will not be answered in sensational headlines or social media debates. They will be answered in quiet parishes, in humble confessionals, in moments of profound, quiet prayer before the tabernacle. They will be answered in how we respond to suffering and injustice, and how we form our children in the faith. They will be answered in what we read, what we watch, what we consume, what we truly prioritize in our lives. Because the war Don Bosco saw was not won on the deck of the ship itself. It was won in the anchoring. The Church was not saved by clever maneuvering or human strategies. She was saved when she secured herself, completely and irrevocably, to the two pillars. And that moment is still ahead, waiting for our conscious choice. What will the world look like on the other side of 2025? We do not know the precise details. Will there be revival, division, a new shepherd, a new wound? Only God knows the exact unfolding of his divine plan. But Don Bosco, in his profound wisdom, already showed us the path to survival, the path to peace. And that path does not begin with a change of strategy. It begins with a fundamental change of heart, a profound turning back to Christ and his mother. Something is shifting across the world, palpable even now, from quiet chapels tucked away in remote villages to bustling cathedrals in global cities. Faithful Catholics are sensing an unease, a deep spiritual stirring beneath the surface. It's not always visible, not always explicitly named, but it's there. Tension, a spiritual pressure building slowly, relentlessly, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. And this is exactly the kind of atmosphere Don Bosco seemed to describe. The dream wasn't about comfort. It wasn't about immediate safety or easy answers. It was about confrontation, a profound spiritual confrontation between the forces of heaven and the forces that seek to extinguish its light, to silence its truth. And in this vision, the church was not comfortably watching from the sidelines. She was in the very center of it, under attack, surrounded, battered, and wounded, and yet, miraculously, not defeated. But here's what many miss. Don Bosco's prophecy doesn't only speak about a single dramatic event in the distant future. It speaks about patterns, spiritual conditions that repeat throughout history, intensifying as the end times draw near. And many of those patterns are unfolding right now. We see a global rise in hostility toward religious expression, a growing intolerance for Christian belief. Governments are passing laws that quietly restrict conscience rights, slowly eroding religious freedom. A generation is growing up more connected than ever by technology, yet increasingly detached from God, from meaning, from transcendent truth. We see a church that, in some regions, is flourishing in quiet sanctity, a silent spring of faith, while in others, it is unraveling from within, succumbing to internal pressures. These are not isolated events. They are threads in a much larger tapestry, one that Don Bosco may have seen dimly, mysteriously, but with a clarity that only saints receive through divine grace. Now consider this. With a renewed sense of urgency, as we approach the Jubilee Year of 2025, the Church is being invited into a global pilgrimage, a movement Pope Francis has called a journey of hope. But what does hope truly mean in a world filled with disillusionment, division, and despair? What does hope look like in a church that's carrying deep wounds, both visible and invisible? Perhaps the answer lies precisely in the two pillars, because even now, as secular ideologies fracture communities and moral clarity becomes increasingly rare, the Eucharist remains the same, silent, constant, powerful, unchanging, the eternal source of grace. And Mary, too, has not ceased intervening in human history. In the last century alone, there have been dozens of Marian apparitions, messages, and devotions rising up around the globe, approved, investigated, and continuing to draw millions of hearts back to prayer, back to Christ. From Fatima to Akita, from Kibeho to Medjugorje, the Mother of God consistently echoes the message Don Bosco made central in his dream. Return. It's no coincidence that the Eucharist and Mary are so often linked in authentic spiritual renewal. One brings us Christ himself, the other gives birth to him and leads us to him. But what does that mean for us right now, in our daily lives? It means that devotion is not optional, it is essential. That prayer is not a last resort, but the primary strategy. That reverence is not a tradition to be negotiated or diluted, but a sacred lifeline to be preserved with utmost care. And as 2025 draws closer, these truths are beginning to stand out more clearly, even in the headlines, even in the heated debates unfolding in parishes and seminaries. Questions that were once whispered, relegated to theological journals, are now asked aloud, urgently. How do we recover the sacred? How do we teach the faith again with conviction, without compromise? How do we hold the church together when it feels like it's splitting from every direction, threatened by forces both external and internal? Don Bosco didn't give us tactical blueprints for church governance or political manifestos. He gave us something infinitely deeper, a spiritual compass, a divinely inspired map for survival. The dream reminds us that the Pope, even when wounded, does not abandon the ship, but continues to lead. The faithful, even when scattered and disheartened, can return to the safety of the pillars. And the church, even when pierced and battered, is never left without a clear path to safety, a path shown by God Himself. But that path is narrow. It is not found in popularity, not in worldly political influence, not in modernization for its own sake. The path of salvation is old, ancient, tried and true. It runs directly through the Eucharist, the source and summit of our faith, and it is faithfully guarded by Mary, our Mother and Queen. And maybe that's why the storm in the dream is so violent, so relentless, because the enemy, the forces of evil, knows that the Church is strongest when she returns to those two divine foundations, when she recovers her profound sense of awe and reverence, when she stops looking outward for validation from the world and starts looking upward for strength, for grace, for divine intervention. That, perhaps, what 2025 is really about. Not just a celebration, but a profound decision point, a turning point, not just for the Vatican, not just for the hierarchy, but for every single Catholic soul on earth. For bishops, for priests, for religious, for families, for you. Where will we stand when the waves rise higher than ever before? Which voice will we follow when many voices speak, contradicting and confusing? And what will our hearts cling to when the old ways are mocked and the new ways feel empty, leaving us spiritually adrift? These are not questions for next year. These are questions for today, for this very moment. Because the storm, as Don Bosco clearly showed, does not begin with noise and chaos. It often begins with silence, subtle changes, forgotten devotions, the insidious replacement of reverence with mere relevance, the quiet shifting of the Church from a profound mystery to a mere human management project. But the solution, the anchoring, is also quiet. The small chapel, the whispered rosary, the humble reception of Holy Communion, the Marian consecration made without fanfare, the hidden acts of faith that bind souls irrevocably to the pillars. It is these acts that anchor the ship. It is these acts that will carry the Church through what is coming. And if Don Bosco was right, what is coming will be decisive, a time of ultimate choosing. As the storms rage and the winds howl across the tumultuous sea of our time, Don Bosco's prophetic vision returns to us, not as a relic of the past, but as a direct divine warning, a vital roadmap, and a heartfelt plea. It echoes now, not just in seminaries or forgotten books, but in the aching questions of millions of souls, people who are looking at the state of the world and asking, what's happening to the Church? What's happening to truth, to morality, to the very foundations of our faith? Don Bosco didn't offer easy answers. He offered truth. What he gave us was something more honest and more enduring. He gave us a vision of war, yes, but also a vision of profound, ultimate victory. A church battered but not broken. A pope wounded but not abandoned. A faithful remnant that, though scattered, remembered where salvation could truly be found. And two pillars, waiting patiently, forever drawing us home.